Today, the Minnesota Senate is expected to pass a bill that would legalize recreational marijuana. So ahead of the vote, Senate lawmakers spoke about their take on the bill.
I will say there's a strong temptation to try to be funny this morning and talk about all the puns about, having a joint bill that everybody hashed out. But the reality is the implications of this particular bill that's up today on the Senate floor are very dire for the state of Minnesota, and it's not a joking matter. We have a number of real concerns about this particular bill. Our caucus has been talking about this for quite some time, and what we've come down to after our analysis is this bill simply isn't enough. Not enough public safety, not enough for public health, and our local governments are really at the bad end of the stick of this. Plus, there's way too much subsidizing of the industry itself, trying to grow it quickly in this state before it's ready. There's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, way too much of that. This bill simply is not ready. Most of us have seen a lot of the polls that are going on around the state and around the country. I mean, there's growing support for the legalization of cannabis products, right? And so it's not a partisan issue. I think we see them on both sides of it. But the real issue is looking at this bill. This is such a convoluted bill with so many different licenses. Look, 15 licenses are included in this one particular bill. I mean, the system that they're putting out here creates bureaucracy, new agency, all these different committee or councils that they're going to be having. This bill is a bit of a train wreck, and so that's where our caucus is really pushing back against this particular bill.
This bill is premature. It is just not ready. And there are many reasons for that. I'll just list a few of them. Public safety is number one. Our law enforcement are against this bill. There's just too many questions about how, if we can ensure public safety. Number one, we don't have a reliable road test. That is key for driving under the influence of cannabis. We don't have like the blood alcohol level. We don't have clear standards. Our law enforcement don't have clear standards about how to ensure safe driving conditions. But there are a couple things that we do know. So I was telling you all that we don't have. But what we do know is that increased cannabis use is associated with increased traffic deaths. So according to the National Institutes of Health, traffic deaths involving marijuana impaired drivers increased 138% for all drivers. 29% since marijuana was legalized in Colorado alone. So seeing nearly a third of the increase in traffic deaths just since legalizing marijuana. I know you're familiar with the Governor's Highway Safety Association, and they have noticed that increased impairment cases in Washington since legalization and increases in fatal crashes, as I mentioned, both in Colorado and Washington, and I have the links to those studies if you want those. Now, there are some courses for law enforcement to become trained in cannabis drug impairment, but this bill doesn't fund any of that. And quite frankly, the test isn't ready yet. So another case where it's premature. We don't have the drug impairment test for cannabis. That's critical. A second big thing is local control. And under this bill, local communities will not be able to deny a cannabis license. They'll have limited ability to regulate the number and the location of facilities selling cannabis. And most of us here, we say we're local control. We think local control is the closest to the people and the best, and yet we're tying the hands of our local elected officials, and we are limiting them from what they see best for their communities and how to limit the access to cannabis. And the other thing is, when there's calls about cannabis misuse, legal cannabis misuse, lighting up in a park with a toddler right there, where are those kind of calls going to go? Well, they're going to go to our locally elected law enforcement. And they're already stretched thin to the max with increased crime and understaffing, shortages of our public safety officials. And now we're going to add more on their plate without additional funding to even help with those public safety calls. And on top of that, on top of not giving our locally elected officials the financial resources they need, we also restrict them from offering a local cannabis excise tax. So we are restricting them from the resources that they need to keep us safe. And we will see a dramatic increase in staffing needs as a result of this legislation.